What is up, people? Welcome back to Blue Chip Prospect for another video. Today I had absolutely zero intention to make a video, but I'm getting a little bit too excited for the draft and I decided to put a quick one together. So the video today is going to be about the Habs target, so we're just going to look at different scenarios and see the players that are going to be available and see how they fit the organization. Is it what they need? Is it not what they need? Are they good players? Are they not good players? So that is it. That's what it's going to be today. So let's get this thing started right away. And we are going to start with the first scenario, and the first scenario is the worst scenario. It's the scenario where everybody has been picked and nothing is left for us. So it's like Ivan Demidov was taken by Chicago, Lev Shunov was taken by Anaheim, and Kane Lindstrom was taken by Columbus, meaning that we have nothing left except for garbage. not exactly that, but we have players like Berkeley Catton left on the board, we have players like Tijigin left on the board, we have players like Beckett Seneca left on the board, or maybe even defensemen like Silayev or Dickinson or whatever, but they are all left shooting defensemen except for maybe Zeev Buium, who's a right shooting defenseman. But are they really gonna go for a offense first defenseman when we have Lane Hudson in the pipeline? I'm not sure about that. So we're gonna start by talking about Berkeley Catton. And Berkeley Catton at that point on the board, I think, is the best player available, no questions. The thing is that he also fits exactly what the Montreal Canadiens need. What the Montreal Canadiens need is a dynamic offensive threat, a player that can create a ton of offense off the rush, a player that can create a ton of offense once it's settled in the zone. And this is exactly what Berkeley can do for you. It's like he's the real deal. He's a whole package, but the only thing he cannot bring to the table is size and physicality, because he's 160 something pounds and 5'10", 5'11" approximately. So he's not a big player, he's not a heavy player, he's not a tall player, he doesn't have a long reach or anything like that. So this is the part that he cannot do for you. But everything else, from the compete, from going to the board, from going in the corners behind the net, for battling around the crease, for going inside and take his shot, or making plays from the outside to the inside, he's just a fantastic competitor. And he also has the skills and the vision to execute what he wants to do. When he sees a play, he knows that he can make that play. Like I said in my full scouting report on him, the guy, whenever he sees the blade of a stick, he can drop the puck perfectly on it every single time. He's one of the best passer, if not the best passer in the draft, in my opinion. But he's also a great shooter, and he's not afraid to go to the inside and play in the traffic to let his shot off. So in my opinion, if you're gonna get a guy at number 5 and all the other one that you wanted, whether it's Kane Lindstrom or Ivan Demidov, are gone, just take Berkeley Catton. You are basically sure to get a dynamic offensive threat. And then obviously the Montreal Canadiens can decide to go a different route and go with a player like Tijigin, he's a heavier player, but he's not necessarily a taller player. He's like 5'11" and a half if you want to be generous, but it's not like he's that much bigger than Berkeley Catton, but he's definitely heavier by almost 20 pounds. But outside of that, he's also a different player in the sense that he invites contact. He also plays really well off the board to the inside. Obviously, he has a great shot with 47 goals or something like that in the season. He skates well. He has great hands in tight traffic. So he can do everything, and he can do everything inside a small area. He's a good, very good small area player, which is really important in the NHL because everybody has a long reach, everybody is good defensively, everybody is physical. So you want a player that's capable to navigate through the traffic and keep the puck on his stick even when he's being poke checked from everywhere or bumped from everywhere. So that's basically what Tejagina can do for you. He's a high-end competitor that trains with his father in the summer, so you know that guy take the gym and the compete and the just taking care of himself very seriously. So he's got a little bit of everything. He can play center and he can play the wing. He can do both. I think next season he's set to play center for the whole season, so he can really set his feet at the center position. So that is a really good pick, also just not as dynamic offensively in my opinion. And the last pick of that scenario would be Beckett Seneca. And Beckett Seneca is a bit like Tijigin in my opinion, a little bit of a reach. obviously that scenario is not ideal for the Montreal Canadiens, but they would get a player that is like 6'3", that skates really well, has some of the best hands in the draft and some of the best reach in the draft with his hands. He's really good at handling the puck from completely with his arm completely reached out, so he's just fantastic handler overall. He's not as good a passer as Berkeley Catton, and he's not as good a shooter as Tejigin. He's like somewhere in the middle. He can do both decently, but he's not like a specialist in any of those type of plays. But he still plays hard, he still competes hard. The guy forechecks like he's a dog with rabies or something like that. But he's offensively, there's always that question mark of the fact that he did not produce a lot. Like he's barely a point per game in the OHL in his draft year, and you're gonna pick that type of production in the top 5. It's questionable. Like if you isolate it and you take like his production from the second half and from the playoff, like it starts matching the eye test a little bit, because when you watch him, you watch a guy that looks like he should be contributing on the board like 1 or 2 points a night, but it did not happen for the first half of the season. But in the second half it was better, and in the playoff it was even better, so that's encouraging. But still there's question marks, because if you take Berkeley Catton, then you have a guy that at the Helinka Gretzky was the best player there, and then throughout the whole season he was the best player in the whole CHL. So there's a certainty with Berkeley Catton that you don't get with a guy with Beckett Seneca. But Beckett Seneca has a certain there's a certain potential about him because of the size and the skating and the handling, that the whole package thing that can make him maybe a better player than Berkeley Catton at some point. But there is a lot of question mark. You really have to believe your scouting team, and you gotta hope and pray that you made the right decision. So here we go for the scenario number 2, and that scenario is a scenario where one of the big forwards, whether it's Ivan Demidov or Kane Lindstrom, falls to the Montreal Canadiens, meaning that one of the team, whether it's Chicago, Anaheim, or Columbus, they went to the stage and they selected a defenseman. So 2 teams selected a defenseman, meaning that one of the forwards is available for the Montreal Canadiens. And if that player ends up being Ivan Demidov, then you just run to the stage and you pick him, and then you just run away, because that's basically all you can do, because at that point you're just being gifted one of the most dynamic player in the draft and one of the best player overall in the draft. Like maybe Macklin Celebrini will be a more valuable player because he's center, because he plays really good defensively, he's bigger, he's faster, he's stronger. But Ivan Demidov has that chance to be the most dynamic offensive player overall in the whole draft, in my opinion. So obviously if you get the chance to pick him, you pick him. And also the Montreal Canadiens with Nick Bobrov, they are probably the team with the best knowledge on the player and the best team to know everything about him, like his knee injury and all that stuff. So because of Nick Bobrov being an ex-director of scouting for SK and his father still working for them as a consultant, I'm not sure if it's still true, but it was true last year. So anyway, they have the connections to have the information that they need on Demidov, and what a pick that would be. And in the end, what are the chances that the guy like Demidov or Lindstrom fall to the Montreal Canadiens? I'm not sure about it, but I do like my chances, because the thing is, the draft is so stacked in high-end defensemen like Sam Dickinson and Silayev and Buium and Parek and Levshunov. They're all player and they're all profiles that don't come around too often. Like, when's the last time that we had a 90-something points offensive defenseman that plays on the right side? I don't remember it. When's the last time we had a 40-something point in the NCAA in his first year? Or a guy that's 6'2" and 210 pounds and can wreck people with his physicality. He also plays offense in the NCAA in his first year. Like, we don't see those things. Same thing with Silayev, a 6'7". The guy can skate like the wind, can defend at an elite level, and has played in the KHL the whole season as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old. I mean, those are players we don't see. Same thing for Sam Dickinson. The guy is a point-per-game player playing for the London Knights, who usually don't play too much their first year, not their first year, but their draft-eligible player, and also a team that will develop that player really well. But a guy is 6'3", skates really well, and is a point-per-game player. Like, we don't get those players every year, so I think that teams like Chicago, who wants to build a team at some point. They don't need only the talent, they also need a defense at some point. I think they will take a defenseman. Same thing for a player for Anaheim. They would be wise to take a defenseman. Same thing for Columbus, actually. They would be wise to take a defenseman, because where they are positioned to get very, very good defensemen and players that actually project as #1 defenseman in the NHL. So this is why I like the chances of the Montreal Canadiens to get a player like Ivan Demidov or Kaden Lindstrom with the 5th pick. And if that pick ends up being Kane Lindstrom, like, I know a lot of people in Montreal will be extremely happy, and I will be extremely happy, even though I'm not his biggest fan. I still have him in my top 10, but I'm not as high on him as other people. But it doesn't change the fact that that guy will fill roles in Montreal. Like, he's gonna come with his big body, 6'4", 216 pounds if I'm not mistaken, and he will fill that role of physicality. Now we're gonna have a guy like Kirby Dack in the top 6, and another guy like Slavkovsky in the top 6, and then another guy like Lindstrom in the top 6. So that's 3 big guys. And then you have Nick Suzuki, who's like 5'11", but is like 210 pounds or something like that, so he's like a square basically. And then the only little guy that you have, basically, it will be Caulfield, so he can be protected with the other players, he can be like sheltered by all the other big players around him. So that would be really good for the Montreal Canadiens. I don't think he's nearly as dynamic as a guy like Demidov, and I think there's those injury issues, but the Montreal Canadiens, they will have the information that they need. They will have a medical on the guy, so they will know if it's a lingering issue or not, and at that point they will be able to make a smart decision, an educated decision on the guy. But nonetheless, I think he would be a fantastic fit for Montreal, even though he doesn't bring as much offense as Ivan Demidov does. He's still a great offensive player, and he also has the fact that he can play around the net. He's extremely physical when he wants to. Sometimes he plays a finesse game, sometimes he plays a hard-nosed game. It depends how he feels, but he's good at both. So one way or another, I think he will be a great player, and he would be a great fit in Montreal. And then there's the third and last scenario, and that's the scenario where the Montreal Canadiens, they miss on both players, like Ivan Demidov and Kaden Lindstrom, but also think that there's a significant gap between the next best defenseman and the next best forwards. It's like if they would think that maybe Tishigin project as a second line center or winger, like 25 goal type of guy, and they think that maybe Zeev Buium is the future Miro Iskanen. Okay, if that's what they actually think, I think the gap is just too wide. It's too large for them to actually go with the forward and not take the defenseman. I read somewhere that they said they would not pick a left shot defenseman, but I did not hear it from them. I listened to actually I watched their press conference, and I did not see that or heard that, but it's possible that I missed it. So if you guys know, just let me know in the comment. It doesn't really matter, but it's just the fact that if they think whether it's Sam Dickinson or Zeev Buium or Silayev is a future star at defense, then you kind of have to pick him, even if you're loaded on the left side. And it's not like we're loaded. Like, we don't have a star on the left side. We have Kaden Gooley, we have Lane Hudson, which did good in 2 games. We'll see in the future how it's going to go. It's probably going to go well, but it doesn't mean that the defense will be really good. He doesn't seem like the type of player that can play like 25 minutes a night. It's possible that Zeev Buium is that type of guy who can play at the same type of offense as Lane Hudson, but also defend at the same level as Miro Iskanen. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's that good, but what I'm saying is that if that's what they think, then they have to go with that, even though he's a left shot defenseman. And maybe they think a right shot defenseman is just too good to pass on. Maybe it's Zane Perek, maybe it's Carter Yakimchuk. There are people who think Carter Yakimchuk is a top 3 player or a top 5 player. There's not many of them, but there are some players who think that. I would be surprised if they think that, and if they pick Carter Yakimchuk. I feel like Mayu is a little bit, like, he's not as good with his hands at all. Not even close, actually, but he's a better skater. He's a physical defenseman, a bit like Carter Yakimchuk. I think they both have the same kind of upside offensively and defensively. But then if they think Zane Perek or Zeev Buium or Dickinson or Silayev are high-end defensemen, then at some point they have to pick those players instead of picking the forward. And that is the scenario where they missed both players, and that draft kind of become like a asset accumulating draft, because you don't get the player that you need for your future. You kind of get an asset, so you maybe that asset is going to be the player that will play in your team later, and you're going to have to trade another player, or maybe you just trade that player eventually and get whatever you needed at that point. But you cannot like pass over that much value if you think that there's a significant gap between two players. You just take the best one and deal with the thing after. So in the end, I think the Montreal Canadiens are extremely well positioned for a great draft pick at number 5. Compared to last year where there was a significant drop between the number 4 and the number 5, well, this year it's not the same, and there's only a small drop if everything goes to plan and like every pick is optimal. Like Macklin Celebrini goes to number 1, and then Ivan Demidov and Lev Shunov, and then Caden Lindstrom go number 4, something like that. And honestly, I highly doubt it's going to go that way. With the amount of high-end defensemen we have in the draft this year, I don't think that teams are going to go for a winger or a guy that maybe have injury problems before they get their number 1 defenseman of the future. But that's just me. And if they actually go and we don't have the chance to draft a guy like Demidov or Caden Lindstrom, well, we still have a guy like Berkeley Catton or TJ Ginla or Beckett Seneca, or we can go with a defenseman like Zeev Buium, who actually looks like a future superstar, or a guy like Sam Dickinson or Silayev or Zane Perek. I mean, there's so much choice. I think there's no significant drop. There's a lot of good players. It goes from like number 2 to number 12 or number 13. Just a ton of good player in this draft, and I think the Montreal Canadiens are gonna get out of there with a significantly good player. So that is it. I hope you enjoyed. See you in the next one. Peace.